Well, hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Joanne. I am a law student in Melbourne. I got some really, mind-blowing news this morning. I'm still trying to process that. But the other big news of the day is that the Robodebt report was handed down today. It's very scathing, it's very damning, and there's been lots of reactions about it. And of course, the opposition, who was then in government at the time, has tried to call it a political trick. The timing, because there's a by-election, because one of the members that is named in that report have since resigned. And of course, they're saying it's all a play of, political play, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to have a look at the reaction plus the report. So let me just show you. So this is the website for the report. The other thing is that Restream has totally changed how everything is laid out. So it's all everything's different. I've also changed internet companies as well. Internet provider, no, I've changed. So I think that's why my internet's all a little bit funny. But anyway, so let's have a look at this. This is the website on the report. So it was handed down this morning. She presented the report. There's 3 volumes. There's 900 pages. Now it says the online ordering systems under construction. So yes, you'll be able to order physical copies of it. So what they've done is that there's 57 recommendations that has been made by the Royal Commission. So the effect on Robodebt on individuals. So it says in Chapter 10, recommendation, design policies and processes with emphasis on the people they are meant to serve. Services Australia design its policies and processes with a primary emphasis on the recipient that is meant to serve. It should entail avoiding language and conduct which reinforces feelings of stigma and shame associated with the receipt of being on government support, facilitating easy and efficient engagement with options of online, in-person and telephone communication which is sensitive to the particular circumstances of the customer cohort, including itinerant lifestyles, lack of access to technology, lack of digital literacy, and particularly difficulties in remote and rural living. Now, what's been really interesting is that the former government has made everything about being online. And so it's interesting that the Royal Commission says, well, you've got to make some things face-to-face. Explaining processes, including clear terms and plain language, acting with sensitivity to financial and other forms of stress experienced by the customer cohort, and taking all practical steps to avoid the possibility that interactions with government might exacerbate those stresses. So that's a recommendation. The recommendation is the concept of vulnerability, clear documentation of exclusion criteria. So they need to ensure that if they're vulnerable, of circumstances affecting the capacity to engage with compliance activity. So if, for example, because of the vulnerability, a person can't comply with that needs to be looked at. Engagement prior to removing a vulnerable indicator from a file, it should ensure that should only be removed where a recipient or evidence provided to the agency in relation to the recipient confirms that they are no longer suffering the vulnerability. And that consideration of vulnerabilities affected by each compliance program, including consultation with advocacy bodies. So if they're working with an agency, to consult with the agency. The roles of advocacy groups and legal services, they need to have easier engagement with Centrelink. They should consider establishing a customer experience reference group. There should be consultation and regard for funding for legal aid commissions and community legal centres. So she's saying you need more experiences of human services employees, so consultation, feedback, face-to-face support, and increased number of social workers. Failures in the budget process. So there we go. Data matching in exchanges. So there's stuff in there. Automated decision making. So she's put in there debt recovery. So she's wanting an overhaul in the reinstate the limitation of 6 years on debt recovery. Okay, how they should go about getting their lawyers. Yes, there was some issues with lawyers. How to do a chief counsel training for lawyers. Draft advice, what should be happening, because what happened in the Royal Commission was there was draft advice, but no one was listening to it. So there's a lot about the legal, the administrative tribunals, what should happen there, the Commonwealth giving the Ombudsman some power, improving the APS or the Australian Public Service in there. And that the Section 34 of the Commonwealth Freedom of Information Act should be repealed. The Commonwealth Cabinet Handbook should be amended so that the description of a document as a cabinet document is no longer itself justification for maintaining the confidentiality of the document. The amendment should make clear that confidentiality should only be maintained over any cabinet document or parts of cabinet documents where it is reasonably justified. Okay, so there is that. So this was the that was the short, or that was the 57 recommendations. So I've just really I'm going to put this in here if you want to go in and have a further chat about it. Okay, so here is the report, and then we're going to look at some reactions, because the reactions. So this is volume 1 of the report. There's 900 pages. So everybody is just sort of trying to get their head around it at the moment. The government did make a statement on it. Of course, it's not loading because I want it to load. There's 1,039 pages apparently. Yes, Michael, you are correct. I mean, this was the thing, Michael, your comment's really quite interesting. She did take exception to the fact that they didn't know, or they were passing the buck, or, you know, it was bizarre that nobody would take responsibility. ScoMo said it was Department of Social Services' fault. Social Services blamed Department of Human Services. Department of Human Services blamed the minister. And so we just had this big roundabout of stuff, you know, this big thing. So here we go. So the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has criticised the commission. He says, this is a quote as reported by the ABC, which has been giving us an update, a daily update. Whatever you think about the ABC, for these types of things, they are very good to follow. He says, Peter Dutton says the release of the Robodebt Royal Commission's finding is being used to harm the coalition's chances at next weekend's Fadden by-election. Several Liberal ministers had oversight of the scheme, including Stuart Robert, who left politics earlier this year, triggering a by-election in the Queensland seat. Mr. Dutton told Nine the government had politicised the release of the findings. It's in quote marks here. There's no question about why it is being dropped today, because we're a week out from the by-election in Fadden, Mr. Dutton told Channel 9. The government is trying to squeeze out every political drop out of it. If there are breakdowns in the system, which there clearly were, then we will look at the recommendations. But don't lose sight of the fact the government has politicised this big time, and they are dropping it out now as a way to try and smear our candidate and our chances in Fadden. Government Services Minister Bill Shorten has rejected suggestions, saying that the debt saga was often cloaked in secrecy and the report should be released urgently. I think it would be inappropriate of the government to get a Royal Commission report and sit on it. And then Michael says, beating down on a class of poor, using this power of the state is not a policy, it's class hatred. I despise these people. Yes, so she's, I believe that she's talked about possible legal action that victims can take. So it says there's 990 pages, including 57 recommendations. So we briefly looked at those, including the part that she has ordered to be sealed. And I understand why she wants that to be sealed, because if the people are going to be held to account, for example, in a court of law, they need to have the opportunity to be able to have a fair hearing, okay, which is actually something that is in our constitution and something that needs to happen. So it says it's issued 200 notices to information and 180 notices to produce documents. It held hours of hearings, 115 witnesses, 5,000 pages of transcript, 10,000 exhibits. Its live stream attracted 668,000 total viewers and 1,099 submissions were received. So then it's come out that it cost $2.8 million of taxpayers' money for former coalition government ministers and prime ministers to be represented at the Royal Commission. Now, I have to give yes, correct, Michael, a fair hint. Yes, I know. I was a victim of that. I mean, I was a victim of Robodebt. I'm one of the lucky ones. So it cost $795,000 for Christian Porter, $477,000 for Scott Morrison, $518,000 for Michael Keenan, $240,000 for Maurice Payne, $183,000 for Stuart Robert, $98,000 for Turnbull. Alan Tudge didn't cost anything, by the way. So for whatever you think about him. So yeah, so there was, as I said, we looked at the recommendation in here. So Commissioner Holmes concludes her Robodebt overview in the report by saying, Robodebt was a crude and cruel mechanism, neither fair nor legal, and it made many people feel like criminals. Since people were traumatized on the off chance they might owe money. It was a costly failure of public administration in both human and economic terms. The architects of Robodebt will be referred for the criminal and civil prosecution. So it'd be very interesting. This was the second paragraph of the Robodebt's report. It is remarkable how little interest there seems to have been in ensuring the scheme. Truly dismaying was the revelation of dishonesty and collusion to prevent the scheme's lack of legal foundation coming to light. So that's in the preface. I don't think this is even working. It's not even loading properly for me. So I got the first page. I don't have anything else other than the first page at the moment. Okay, so then we've got, so you can see the preface there, the preface. Okay. So here is, in accordance with patent issued to me on the 8th of August 2022, an amendment to the patent issued 16th of February and May 11, I have made inquiries to present you the report of the Royal Commission into Robodebt scheme. I have provided you an additional chapter of the report which has not been included in bound report and is sealed. It recommends the referral of individuals for civil action or criminal prosecution. I recommend that this additional chapter remains sealed and not be tabled with the rest of the report so as not to prejudice the conduct of any future or civil action or criminal prosecution. I'm also submitting relevant parts of the additional chapter of the report to heads of various Commonwealth agencies such as the Australian Public Service Commissioner, the National Anti-Corruption Commissioner, the President of the Law Society of the Australian Capital Territory, and the Australian Federal Police. I'm hoping that we will find out who they are in due course. I'm confident the Commission has served the purpose of bringing into open an extraordinary saga illustrating the myriad of ways that things can go wrong through venality, incompetence, and cowardice. In addition to the recommendations, I've made referrals of information in respect to a number of individuals to 4 different authorities for further investigation. I do not propose to name the entities which I've made referrals because it would only lead to speculation about who has been referred where, which almost would certainly be wrong. So there you go. So then we had the government's response. And so this is, again, on the effects of Robodebt to individuals. Commissioner Holmes said, at the heart of the massive failure of public administration, which was the Robodebt scheme, were the social security recipients who were targeted by what the former Minister of Social Services, the Honourable Alan Tudge, described as the new tool, making a major contribution to the government's fraud and non-compliance savings goal. A great example of the government using technology to strengthen our compliance activities with faster and more effective review systems. Some social security recipients who were affected by the scheme gave evidence before the Commission. The Commission is grateful to those witnesses for their account of the trauma they suffered as a result of the scheme. Evidence which was not easy to give. The Commission is also indebted to the community organisations which, with very limited resources, provided assistance to the Commission in explaining what they heard and did during the scheme. So one of her recommendations is to give these community organisations more money to be able to help the vulnerable. I want to particularly acknowledge the many thousands of individuals who are harmed by the Robodebt scheme and thank those who bravely share their stories with the Commission. This is from the Prime Minister. Sorry, the Prime Minister says this. I want to particularly acknowledge the many thousands of individuals who are harmed by the Robodebt scheme and thank those who bravely shared their stories with the Commission. You have ensured the voices of those affected and their families were heard. We have arrived at the truth because of the courage of some of the most vulnerable Australians. People who have shown bravery in the face of injustice, hardship, and sometimes terrible grief. The courage stands in stark contrast to those who sought to shift the blame, bury the truth, and carry on, justifying the shocking harm. He says they'll carefully consider the recommendations made. So here's the Prime Minister.
We have arrived at the truth because of the courage of some of the most vulnerable Australians. People who have shown bravery in the face of injustice, hardship, and sometimes terrible grief. The courage stands in stark contrast to those who sought to shift the blame, bury the truth, and carry on justifying this shocking harm. The Robodebt scheme was a gross betrayal and a human tragedy. It pursued debt recovery against Australians who in many cases had no debt to pay. It was wrong, it was illegal, it should never have happened, and it should never happen again. Under the former Liberal government, this scheme unlawfully raised $1.76 billion in alleged debts against some 526,000 Australians. This tragedy caused stress, anxiety, financial destitution, and sadly had a very real human toll. For more than 4 years, Liberal ministers dismissed or ignored the significant concerns that were raised over and over again, including in the Parliament, but also by victims, by public servants, by community organisations, and of course legal experts. The Royal Commission has found that the Liberal Party's Robodebt scheme was, to quote, a crude and cruel mechanism, neither fair nor legal, and it made many people feel like criminals. In essence, people were traumatised on the off chance they might owe money.
So that was the Prime Minister speaking. So there was a press conference there earlier. So this is what was said about ScoMo, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, in the report. Apparently, I haven't read it yet, and I'm still trying to load the report as well. So I'm still trying to get the report to load so we can actually have a bit of a look at it, but that's okay. So this is what was said about ScoMo. Mr. Morrison allowed Cabinet to be misled because he did not make that obvious inquiry. He took the proposal to Cabinet without necessary information as to what it actually entailed, and without the caveat that it required legislative and policy change to permit the use of the ATO PAYG data in a way proposed in circumstances where he knew that the proposal still involved income averaging. Only a few weeks previously, he had been told of the caveat. Nothing had changed in the proposal, and he had done nothing to ascertain why the caveat no longer needed to be applied. He failed to meet his ministerial responsibility to ensure that Cabinet was properly informed of what the proposal actually entailed and to ensure it was lawful. So the PM also admitted that he has not seen the sealed part of the report. He said it's been provided to the appropriate people, not to myself or to the minister. So I believe the Attorney General is one of those ones that has actually got that, and will then speak to the Prime Minister as to what needs to be done. So Mr. Shorten made this comment on it. Commissioner Holmes has given us a Royal Commission report into the Robodebt scandal, which I think, in summary, so that the previous government and senior public servants gaslighted the nation and its citizens for 4.5 years. They betrayed the trust of the nation and its citizens for 4.5 years with an unlawful scheme which the federal court has called the worst chapter of public administration. It fundamentally says that it has broken the sacred trust that when citizens give some of their power to the government, that the government will make sure that it helps not hurt citizens. This report shows how the previous government and senior public servants hurt, not helped citizens. The lesson for the public service of Australia, one I hope resonates with the next generation. We would take our time to consider the recommendations, but we will not take too much time. Clearly, this is unfortunately an example where the ends do not justify the means. Unfortunately, many Australians were subjected to unconscionable conduct by their own government. Whether ScoMo should resign, he doesn't.
Should Scott Morrison resign, and what will the consequences for public servants, including Catherine Campbell, be?
Well, Scott Morrison, of course, is mentioned countless times in this report, and it is a matter for him what action he takes in response. But I make this point. The Royal Commission has comprehensively rejected the Liberal Party's talking points that the system had not changed at all, and it calls that a falsehood. The Commission found that Robodebt, that was created in 2015, was, to quote the Commission on page 31, said this, was precisely responsive to the policy agenda that had been communicated to the Social Security portfolio departments, both in private meetings and in the public sphere. So it makes it very clear, it just rejects the argument that we heard in Parliament about that. With regard to public servants, of course, it's not appropriate to comment on individual cases, but as the Commissioner has made clear, there is a sealed section of the report with referrals for, to quote the report, civil action or criminal prosecution. Agency heads are, of course, empowered to take immediate action pending further investigations, and I'm very confident that they will.
Okay, so that was what was said. Now, he talked about the sealed section, and he said not to prejudice the conduct of any future action. She's not saying that it won't occur. In fact, she's saying the opposite is what has occurred. To be clear, I received the report at the same time you did. This is what the Prime Minister said, as did the Minister. We can't have been more transparent than holding the press conference immediately. We gave you the same time that we had to go through it. That's why I've got a document here with little quote marks out. We're being as transparent as we do. We need to make sure that we don't prejudice action. And I think people want action as a result. I think we will take the appropriate legal advice there as well. Agency heads, of course, have received that element of the report. The head of my department has the sealed section. I do not. So again, he said it was wrong, it was illegal, it should never have happened and should never happen again. So Bill Shorten said the Royal Commission had delivered overdue justice and the results were traumatic but vindicating. 443,000 vulnerable Australians who were identified in the federal court and tens of thousands of others were literally shaken down by their own government. They had the onus of proof reversed. They were treated as guilty until proven innocent. And for those who had the temerity to complain, they were subject to vile political tactics. Today is the day about those victims. He also thanked the advocates for raising uncomfortable truths. There are many thank yous for speaking up. So he's committed to responding to it. Hello, Terry. How are you? The cat, yes, the cat's doing all right. She's asleep on my bed at the moment. My daughter comes home, is on her way back from Japan at the moment. They've had some flight issues, so they're supposed to be back today. They won't be back till tomorrow sometime, so I'm assuming I've got the cat until the weekend. So Trudge's action represented an abuse of power. Trudge's actions. So she says it's remarkable that the scheme continued when its unfairness, probably illegality and cruelty had been publicly laid bare in early 2017. The government continued to illegally raise debts against society's most vulnerable. And they called it the watershed moment. So, as Minister Alan Tudge had the most significant amount of public power, releasing information about victims in the media in response to growing criticism represented an abuse of power. On Stuart Robert, Mr. Robert was going beyond supporting government policy. He was making statements of fact as to the accuracy of debts, citing statistics which he knew could not be right. Nothing compels ministers to knowingly make false statements. Now, I remember watching Mr. Robert give his evidence, and he said that he didn't believe it, but he towed the party line. That was all about towing the party line. And so she was not very happy that he would toe the party line, giving misinformation when he knew that the information was wrong. I mean, I just find that to be absolutely shocking. So we talked about Morrison. So this was senior lecturer of La Trobe's Law School. Let's have a look at this one.
I'm really worried that we're having a very politician-centered conversation. I haven't read the whole report, but I've read the bits that are most important to the victims, and that is the overall big picture. That there is a built-in culture of disrespect, and it has crept right into the bones of our social security system.
I'd say that is, oh, hi Vidandra. Thank you. I've got a bit of a issue with my with my university stuff now that I have to make a couple of tough decisions about, and it comes down to finances. So anyway, it doesn't matter.
Listening to the politicians, they want to soothe us, they want to reassure us. Robodebt was not stopped by politicians. It's really important to understand that 100,000 Australians got these debts in the first year of the programme. There was no media coverage. There were no one speaking for them until the people themselves spoke. And they were backed by heroic volunteers. People like Asher Wolf, Justin Warren, Lindsay Jackson. They're not taking a press conference today, but they are the agents of change. We know that so many people suffered so badly, and we have to strengthen their hand against their government.
And that was part of what she was talking about. That's the part that she was talking about where they have to increase the funding for legal community services, so that people who are vulnerable can seek legal advice and get the advice.
And recommendation 1 of this report is pretty remarkable. It says, basically, stop the stigma and shame. And that's a challenge for all Australia, because Robodebt was easy to perpetrate. The politicians are appearing here today. They are taking this report away for study. Victims are sitting at their kitchen tables. They need to know what is being done for them.
Again, another good point, because there is that stigma that if you're on any type of benefits from the government, that you're hopeless, you're no good, you're a loser. We've got to stop that stigma and stop seeing it as a handout, but more of a hand up. That the money that these people are getting, the money that people get from the government, is to help them. It needs to be a hand up. I mean, and assistance.
As part of any scheme that's implemented, you need to look at the cohort that's affected by it. We know there was a power imbalance there as it was. Now, you say that this was easy to perpetuate. There was a power imbalance already there, and the scheme only exacerbated that.
Absolutely. So the central driving force of the scheme was that these people would internalise the shame, that they would cop the debt. And what volunteers, who will never be known, never be thanked, what they did was say to people, that's a Robodebt. You have a right to interrogate your government. And what happened here was fundamentally that our government, politicians and bureaucrats, used the silent spaces of government power, the private spaces, and they launched something on everyday Australians. They lost sight of what a social security system is meant to be about.
Yes, because they were trying to cut money. They were trying to save money. And they thought, well, the easiest way to get some of our debt back, let's take it from the people that don't deserve it.
Families, health, care. And it took grieving mothers to take those letters off their fridges and to show Australia what was being done to them and what it might mean. And we owe those people so much. And I'm looking at these recommendations, perpetrators are perpetrators, politicians are politicians. We need to make this about us. All of us will sit at kitchen tables with letters we may not understand. What is being done to help people against?
Again, if you've got something that you don't understand, you should be able to get help to understand what's being asked of you. And that, again, is another recommendation that things are put in the simplest language.
This most awesome power.
Now, Dr. O'Donovan, a number of former ministers, even the former Prime Minister, gave evidence. We're going to go now to Stuart Robert, who was the Government Services Minister from 2019 to 2021. Let's go to that now.
Ministers are required to defend the government's programs.
Oh, yes, you're going to hear him talk about ministers are required to defend the programs. This is very interesting.
Part of cabinet solidarity, regardless if they agree with them or not, as, by the way, is the public service. I've implemented many things that I passionately disagree with, but I'm still required as a minister to represent them and defend them. And that's what I've done here, regardless of my personal sense of belief.
Well, it's not just a question of personal sense of belief. On your state of mind that you assert exists.
So he was saying that he implemented stuff he didn't believe in because it was the party line. The question is, at what point do you, where does your morals and ethics take you from that? How can you deliberately mislead people?
Existed from the 4th of July 2019, you had serious doubts about the lawfulness of this program.
Well, my view was the sole use could not be sufficient. It just can't. Partial I wasn't well versed on, only because government has a way of adding bits and pieces together to make a whole. The tax office was a master at this. But at the sole use, yes, not just misgivings, it couldn't possibly work.
Stuart Robert there. Now, Dr. O'Donovan, what did the hearings and now the report today say to you about government accountability?
So the report is strong on transparency. So I can point at things that we can do now that we could not do. It's really important, like I'm supposedly an expert in calling governments to account. I am so relieved we got to this day, but it is a fluke. Every institution failed these people. We need widespread reform. So some of the things we can do if these recommendations are implemented fully, without weasel words, without bureaucratic games, algorithms will be published, their impact will be audited. We don't even know what algorithms government is using. I know what's happening at the kitchen tables of Australia. We don't know whether people are missing out on support. But one crisis that we know is out there, because it was the end statement of every person, every victim at this Royal Commission, they said, I will never seek support from this institution again. And that needs to be perceived as the crisis, the thing that will damage families, it'll damage people. We cannot have it. We cannot stand for it. And politicians, Mr. Albanese is going to Mr. Albanese, Mr. Dutton is going to Mr. Dutton. We have to stand with the people now and say they need to know what is being done to them. They need to be able to call it out and get answers, not 4.5 years later, but right when their world is crashing apart. People used to ask me, what's a Robodebt, and look for a technical definition. Robodebt was a mum trying not to cry as her child was playing in front of them. The world crashing down, and no help except for people who aren't on any stage. And we have got to, in this country, stop grading party political contests and put the stories of people at the centre of our policy making. And as Commissioner Holmes says, Stop the shame and the stigma.
Yeah, I agree with that. So then there's the CEO of Economics Justice, a peak organisation who represents community legal centres. They've said that they're pleased with the recommendation. We are still seeing our member centres, community legal centres, who represent people every day whose lives are being seriously affected by the automated decision making. Their lives are being affected by debts that have been raised against them. They still don't know how these debts are being raised. So the legal centres are saying that we've still got some issues here. The anti-welfare rhetoric, easy populism. So, yes, useful for campaign purposes. So she said, in doing so, the Commission found that Mr. Morrison clearly communicated to the public and departmental bosses that his approach to the portfolio was to crack down on welfare cheats, rorting the system. In doing so, he contributed to a certain atmosphere in which any proposals responsive to his request would be developed. The context was apt to encourage the development of proposals which reflected the approach and tone of his powerful language. So here is the tort of misfeasance to appear to exist. So here's where we get interesting. The Commissioner considered recommending a comprehensive compensation scheme for Robodebt victims, but her reluctant conclusion was that it would not be practical. It is impossible to devise any set of criteria that will apply across the board because people were affected in different ways. But she said victims of the scheme may have individual or collective remedies. On the evidence before the Commission, elements of the tort of misfeasance in public office appears to exist. Where litigation is not an option, Ms. Holmes pointed to the Commonwealth scheme for compensation for detriment caused by defective administrative, which she said would be a very euphemistic way of describing Robodebt. It is not appropriate to say more on that front. So she has given a way that people could seek some assistance legally. Oops. I've just lost it all. All right. Mr. Roberts has responded, so that's interesting. Public sector union has said that they were frontline public sector workers were ignored. What was sold to politicians and then to public as a budget saving measure ultimately cost the taxpayers more than $500 million. The report notes the scheme was budgeted to generate $4.7 billion in savings, but in reality, only $406 million was saved. The cost of implementing, administering, suspending, winding back the scheme exceeded $971 million. The irony of the expense to the public purse of what was thought to be a savings bonanza is obvious. Mr. Robert has welcomed the report. He previously admitted to making false public statements to defend Robodebt because of cabinet solidarity. So he said, as the minister that worked hard to get the legal advice and close down the income compliance scheme, I welcome the RC report and its sensible recommendations. I have not received a notice of inclusion in the sealed section, and I understand they have all gone out. Right. So he's saying he hasn't received anything from anybody. Aggressive abuse of government power, says the Australian Council of Social Services CEO. They've come out and said, so that is about all of it, all that has come about from that. I just want to reiterate that if this has been a really hard day for the victims, triggering, and so there are some people that you can seek advice to. I'm going to try. I actually would like to read the report if I could. Vidandra, it's the thing that annoys me the most at the moment is that nobody had told me that I had reached the limit of my so we have a education loan system here that I'd reached the threshold. I'd actually reached I've actually got no more money to use, and I now have a uni debt, which nobody told me about until I just got this notice that I've got an encumbrance on my account, and I've now got to try and work it out. I've got to work out what's happened to it all and how I'm going to proceed from here. I've got a couple of I've been trying to find out what my options are, so hopefully I can get it sorted. But I'm a bit annoyed that nobody told me anything. When I rang the uni, I said, if they'd said, "Hey, we want to tell you that this is going to happen," I may have, I may have changed course, or I could have done something about it. I just was blindsided. So anyway, story of my life, I guess. But I was a bit shocked. So I'm going to have a look at it and see how it's all accumulated, because it's a bit of money that we're talking about too. No, this is not low. I cannot get this to open up for me. Oh, there we go. All right. So here is the part one of the report. I had to do it in separate things. So this says, the Royal Commission into Robodebt Report 1, Volume 1. So it says this report talks about some difficult themes. So it's got a trigger warning. When a report has a trigger warning, you know that it's going to be a tough one. So, and again, it says it in the report. It's got the numbers that you can call. This is the letter from the Catherine Holmes. She's a senior counsel and is the Companion of Australia, which is an award. So that's ACSC after her name. Okay, and that was the. All right, let's have a look. So here it is. This is what everyone's been reading this afternoon. So this is what she says. All right, I'm going to read the preface. At the outset of my inquiry, I had anticipated that the Commission would uncover how such a patently unreliable methodology as income averaging without other evidence to determine entitlement to a benefit could be part of an Australian government debt raising and recovery scheme. What has been startling in the Commission's investigation of the Robodebt scheme has been the myriad of other ways in which it failed the public interest. It is remarkable how little interest there seems to have been in ensuring the scheme's legality, how rushed its implementation was, how little thought was given to how it would affect welfare recipients, and the lengths to which the public servants were prepared to go to oblige ministers on a quest for savings. Truly dismaying was the revelation of dishonesty and collusion to prevent the scheme's lack of legal foundation coming to light. Equally disheartening was the ineffectiveness of what one might consider institutional checks and balances. The Commonwealth Ombudsman's Office, the Office of Legal Services Coordination, and the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner and the Administrative Appeals Tribunal in presenting any hindrance to the scheme's continuance. This report makes a number of recommendations. Some are directed at strengthening the public service more broadly, some to improving the processes of the Department of Social Services and Services Australia. Others are concerned with reinforcing the capability of oversight agencies. A sealed chapter contains referrals of information concerning some persons for further investigation by other bodies. That in part is intended as a means of holding individuals to account, in order to reinforce the importance of public service officers acting with integrity. But as to how effective any recommended change can be, I want to make 2 points. First, whether a public service can be developed with sufficient robustness to ensure that something of the like of the Robodebt scheme could not occur again will depend on the will of the government of the day, because culture is set from the top down. Second, politicians need to lead a change in social attitudes to people receiving welfare payments. The evidence before the Commission was that the fraud in the welfare system was minuscule, but that is not the impression one would get from what ministers responsible for social security payments have said over the years. Anti-welfare rhetoric is easy populism, useful for campaign purposes. It is not recent, nor is it confined to one side of politics. As some of the quoted material in this report demonstrates, it may be that the evidence in this Royal Commission has gone some way to changing public perceptions. But largely, these attitudes are set by politicians who need to abandon for good, in every sense, the narrative of taxpayer versus welfare recipient. My thanks go to Council Assisting, the Office Official Secretary, the Solicitors Assisting, the Legal and Research teams, the media officers and administrative staff of the Royal Commission for their stalwart efforts in bringing together hearings at short notice and in working to analyse massive amounts of evidence for the preparation of this report. It has been an arduous 10 months with many late nights and missed weekends. She's right, comes from the top up. So it talks about, here's the introduction as to what they had to comply with. So they had five councils assisting them. The firm of Gilbert and Tobin were appointed as official solicitors to the Commission. And then it goes through and talks about how it was run, the witnesses, where the witnesses came from, procedural fairness and standard of proof, because you have to show the procedural fairness. And then any challenges that they had. The Commission had to act very quickly to assemble hearings and proceed to take evidence without much of the information needed. When the documents did come, they were great in number, and some were very close to the end of the hearing. There was no one witness who gave any connected account of really what happened. Parliamentary privilege, about parliamentary privilege and why parliamentary privilege could be used and how the report is done, and the use of language. So the Commissioner has tried as far as possible to avoid falling into what, without wishing to offend, might be called public service jargon. It has had to resort to use of acronyms because of the report would be considerably longer if, for example, every time the Department of Social Services were referred to, its name had to be out in full. One term which appears throughout the report is recipient, to signify people who, during the Robodebt scheme, were receiving benefit or put. So it's gone through and talked about that, the fact there's acronyms. Terms of reference. So Vedandra, apparently I hit the limit during my first semester of uni, so only part of the semester was covered. And they've told me that by the end of the year, the debt will hit something like 23,000. So I've got to work out. I don't know whether to, I don't know whether, A, I don't know where the money's coming from, and 2, I don't know. I'm going to have to just try and pay off as much of it as I can. Essentially, it means I can't graduate until my university bill's paid, unless I can come with some ways that I can get added onto the loan. But yeah, it just came out of left field. I said, I don't understand why. You've told me this now when this happened, like, at the start of the year. Like, why am I only being advised of this now? So here is the recommendations. But anyway, it's just really, it was just really bizarre. But yeah, so here's the recommendations here. So the government has said that they're going to look at all the recommendations and they're going to go through and see. Some of them are just very straightforward. Some of them, they need to look at some other stuff. So there'll be lots of now this is interesting. I like this. And Service Australia and DSS should introduce to ensure that all new programs and schemes are developed with a customer-centric focus, and that specific testing is done to ensure that recipients are at the forefront of each new initiative. Well, considering that a lot of the offices, face-to-face offices, are closed, I think that's got to be re-looked at, in my opinion. So this is the overview of Robodebt. So this takes us through what it was from 2013. It goes back to Tony Abbott, as to what Tony Abbott said. In January 2015, newly appointed Minister for Social Services, Mr. Morrison, described himself in an interview as planning to be a strong welfare cop on the beat, because Australians were not going to cop people who were going to rot the social services system, which is interesting. As I said, it was very minuscule, and it's cost more to do. They barely got a tenth back. So the differences between what they were doing and what they were. So this is the details as to what it was. And by the way, uni starts next week. So they've told me the few days out of uni starting. So yeah, I'm a bit hit with that this morning, and then the Robodebt stuff. So I'm a bit all over, my head is just all over the place, because this is a bit of a, being a Robodebt victim, I'm in a bit of a, hello, Bo. I'm in a bit of a back and forth about this. So this is the Robodebt timeline. This is how it started. So we've got pictures here. Hello, Cactus. Bill, how are you? We're talking about Robodebt. So the phases. See, I mean, it's the way that it was set up, it was always going to create a problem. Then she's here talking about the legal stuff. There were lots of. I mean, it's interesting how one of the recommendations is to do with the lawyers and the people that they have working for them, because a lot of them missed it. The different incarnations of Department of Social Services, because it was also split up. Hello, Bo. Hello, everybody that's just walked in. So now we've got brief history of Centrelink and the beginning of human services. I used to refer to it as human remains. I'm glad I didn't, as Bill says, I'm glad I didn't get stung with this. My mates did, and they were already suffering. Well, I got stung with it too, Bill, and I was working for the department when I got stung with it as well, and I knew it was wrong. I couldn't, and it was really embarrassing working for them and getting stung with this. And I got my payout, because remember there was the class action. I got my $10 payout from the class action. So this is entitlements. So all the different payments. So at the time that was subject to, so all the people that were put under the microscope were on these payments. So New Start and Youth Allowance form the bulk of payments subject to the scheme. Professor Whiteford points out that between 5% and 6% of New Start recipients and between 2.2% and 2.5% of Youth Allowance recipients had stable earnings over the financial years over the scheme operated. Yeah, I'm a bit triggered, but I'm a range of emotions actually after this report's come out. Like, I'm happy that finally we're being vindicated and we know that officially that it was wrong, but we still are waiting for those to be held to account. So then we've got the debt recovery section, how the data matching came about. But this goes back, we've had, what, 4 Prime Ministers? We had 4 Prime Ministers over this scheme. So it says Services Australia was unable to provide the Commission with figures for the incidence of averaging before the scheme because each individual debt in the system would have been examined and the debt management information system was old and was not functional for that type of request. However, it does not seem to have loomed large in DHS's practices. So before they had this computer operated stuff, everything was done by a person, and it was all fact checked before they went before a debt was raised, and they talked to you before they would go down the debt recovery scheme. This Robodebt thing, you just got hit with these are all the changes in the acts, all the it says you now owe a debt. It was a bit like my letter today. You have an encumbrance on your account. It's like, what encumbrance? Overview and origins of Robodebt. So it's, yeah. So she says, part of the report tells the story of Robodebt from the frenetic, confused machinations of a pressured bureaucracy to its enormous end, ultimately brought by the legal advice in which Essence made precisely at the same point that has been made in the first legal advice provided. Oops. What's just happened here? The scheme's demise, for all of its seeming inevitability, took far longer than it should have. Goes to the budget measure. I mean, these Royal Commission, I mean, no wonder it took 10 months. You imagine all the stuff that they had to sit through. How did it happen? The savings and gender and policy direction. And all the people get named. Apparently, yeah, there's a rush proposal. To be honest with you, this is my concern about the voice to Parliament 2 part of it, because I'm just yeah, anyway, I'm not going to go down that one. That's even more controversial. We need boats, because anything that is rushed is doomed to fail, in my opinion, and we've seen that. So these are all the exhibits. So these are all the exhibits that they've used to write that chapter. This is only section 1. There's 3 parts to this. All right. Conceptual development, yeah. How there was a misunderstanding of the documents and the provisions. All I saw from the Robodebt Royal Commission was all these people not knowing anything about it, denying anything. I think somewhere she talks about how all the politicians seem to have a memory collapse. Their memories all disappeared. All the department heads blamed each other, and all the politicians had bad memories. So it's funny how that happened. So here you go, more evidence of inaccuracies. But when you've got the politicians themselves talking about how they didn't think it was going to work, then it was redone again. 2014. Look, I did get my debt back. I think it was like $8,000. It was about $9,000. I think that I was was owed. This is from Mr. Morrison. He was the person that first started it. It had the 2 departments. They split up there. So that's the history of that. It's funny how ScoMo appears in all of these, on all these scandals. Yeah. I did defend the guy when I wrote on my constitutional assignment. It's quite interesting. Articulations of the scheme. I know the executive minute. Catherine Campbell. So January 2015, 5th of January 2015, met Melissa Golightly. It's funny because I actually thought for a very long time that Molly Golightly and Melissa Golightly, the person from here, was the same person, because they were both on YouTube a lot at the same time. It took me a while to realize that they were two separate people. And the thing is that Melissa Golightly, she's now since deceased. So, that was also the other thing. So it couldn't have been. But yeah, I thought they were talking about her for the longest time. Yeah, so there's a lot of this. This is Maurice Payne involvement. Social services start to become concerned. But see, while everyone was concerned, nobody did anything. I was really concerned that they were going to pass it on to somebody who couldn't be held accountable. We've got the executive minute again. We've still got lots to do here. So let's see if we can pull this up. Let's go. I'm going to go back. I want to go back because I want to get to the conclusion. I just want to get to the third part of this. Let's see if we can find the conclusion of this, because I want to see what she says about all these politicians and stuff like that. So, all right, it's all loading up. So, my daughter's plane she's had flight changes from Japan. So she's got a 6-hour layover in Sydney now. So hopefully she was supposed to be home today, but she's not going to go home. Oh, this is the appendices. Part 3 is the appendices. She's hoping to get home tomorrow, but trying to see if she can get an earlier flight. I won't be online much longer. It's been a tough old day. I'm pretty drained. I've been suffering really badly with my mental health these last couple of weeks. Something to do about going like a bat out of hell and then stopping and doing very little sort of messes around with your mental health, I've found. It's horrible. You just... So I'm going to sit and... I'll probably sit and ponder this a little bit more because, I want to... Oh, yeah, here we go. Oh, yeah, this is interesting. This chapter, yeah, so barriers with the schemes, because this was the other issue, that you couldn't talk to anybody about it. This was the most frustrating thing. So they talk about this is introduction to section 2, part 2. And it talked about barriers to engagement, unfair accusations, and all the witnesses involved there. But barriers, the initial letters were very cryptic, because you thought that you were going to go to jail. Those scam letters that we all get now that we all laugh at? Well, this was like that. And the other thing is, some debt letters were being sent to addresses that people had not resided in for a long time. And this woman said that she had been homeless and she obtained the letter through a MyGov account after a call from Centrelink. And the onus was on the recipient to respond. If you didn't respond, they assumed... if you didn't respond, it was presumed that you were guilty. Payslips are often difficult to obtain. There was one woman that talked about she'd actually left because she was bullied, and the department said she had to go back to the place where she was bullied and get her payslips, and she couldn't do it. She just couldn't do it. They were ill-equipped to help resolve issues, remoteness. Someone lived. He said because he was so remote, he relied on online services and would have to deal with the most day-to-day issues over the internet. I recall that my internet was slow and unreliable. I could not afford a fast internet service. My phone service was poor. These matters made it difficult to me. I think the isolation of my living situation made it harder for me to manage the issues relating to the Robodebt. I recall attempting to telephone Centrelink to provide Centrelink with the amounts recorded on those payslips. I was unable to do so. Again, recall being left on hold for hours and giving up because I was often working during the day. I was not in a position to be on the phone for long periods of time. The only way I could provide the relevant payslips to Centrelink, other than giving the information on the payslips to Centrelink by way of telephone, was to physically provide payslips at a Centrelink office. This option was not practical for me because there was no agency office anywhere near my home. The nearest Centrelink office was around 100 kilometres away. So he lived 100 kilometres away, and then, so this is a stigma, unfair accusations, financial effects. If you didn't respond, they actually just took money out of your accounts. So this is the amount of money that they took from people. Look at this. It was horrifying. Yeah, wasn't great. So each section has an introduction and all the witnesses. So I know that this is, as I said, this is pretty yucky one. So these are more recommendations. I believe the government's stopping the private call centres now. So hopefully if they take care of their call centres, they can be trained properly in what they need to do. Failure to correct the public record, they should be able to correct that. Yeah. So it's giving more power to people that can fix the issues. PricewaterhouseCoopers was heavily criticised as well. I just want to get to the conclusion. And then so oops, and as you can see, I've just got blank screen. I just recently changed my internet because I've got to try and save money. So I've had to downgrade it. So it's not as fast as it once was. Oh well. But it's more reliable. It's not dropping all the time though. It's just very slow. Oops, that one works. So why hasn't this one worked? So, yeah, no, it's not going to give it to me. So anyway, that's our Robodebt stuff. So it's been very damning, very scathing. There's that secret. There's that secret document that has recommendations about who should get noticed. What we've discovered is that was an abuse of power. They targeted the most vulnerable people, the people that they didn't think would actually respond, and targeted them in the hope that they would just pay up. And of course, a lot of us did. I mean, I did because it was easier to do it than to fight. But I remember, and I was working for them, and I had to take, if I remember rightly, I actually had to take a day off work because it took a whole day to get to speak to somebody to try and sort it out. And I had to go and get download bank statements. And like somebody said, like like they were saying, well, if you can't get your bank statements online, go to a bank. But it was like $3 to get your bank statement. It's like it would have been great if it was that easy. Yeah. But anyway, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave the Robodebt one here. I don't know when I'll be on again. I might be on again later. I might come back on later, or I might come on later tonight. But everything's been moved on Restream, so everything's changed. So getting used to that. Anyway, I want to thank you. Hopefully we can come back with some updates as to who's been charged or who's been investigated, but I guess we won't know until it happens. But thank you for joining me. If you want to hit the like button, subscribe button, and catch me later, and